Welcome to the Candor Potholder Knitting tutorial. This is an easy knitting pattern and it works up quickly in just a couple of hours. I've noticed that potholders like this are trending right now, so I wanted to work up a pattern so that you could make it for yourself instead of buying it from a store. I also love the idea of making these and gifting them to someone else, as it's thoughtful and homemade, but you can do it pretty last minute. You can get the downloadable PDF of this pattern on Etsy. My shop is Modern Made Shop, all one word, and I'll link that in the description. This tutorial is going to go through the pattern step by step, so we're going to cover the materials you need, getting started, so basically we're going to separate our yarn into 3 different balls before we start. The Latvian cast-on method, which creates a nice braided edge. Row 1, this is a 1-row repeat pattern, so that's the only row that you will need to learn. Casting off, making the hanging loop, and weaving in your ends. Let's go over our needles and our yarn that we'll be using. For needles, you need a size 17. I preferred working with circular, but straight will work as well. I used Yarn Bee's cotton knit yarn. This is a tubular knit yarn. You can get it at Hobby Lobby. You can play around with other yarns, but I would make sure that it's weight 6, and you will need 42 yards. To get started, we're going to separate our yarn into 3 different balls. If you're using the exact yarn that I used, it's 42 yards, so I just split that skein in half, made it into 2 balls. They're each 21 yards each. And then I took 56 inches from both of those balls of yarn and then wound it up into 1 ball of its own. It's okay if it's longer than that, but make sure it's at least 56 inches. So we're working with 2 strands for the pot holder. That's the 2 larger balls, and the smaller ball is for the Latvian cast-on. So take all your strands of yarn and make a slip knot. If you've never done this cast-on before, what's special about it is it creates a braided edge, so the bottom of your pot holder will look really nice and neat and braided. Like pretty much all of knitting, it's one of those things that might look tricky if you're learning it for the first time, but once you have it, it's just muscle memory. So I want you to look at 2 strands of yarn as one here, because that's how we're going to be working it. So the 2 larger balls, those strands of yarn are 1 strand right here. And then the smaller ball, the 56-inch yarns, are right here. We're going to pretend that that's 1 strand as well. That's just how we're going to be working it. You want to hold your yarn like this, so create a V with your thumb and your pointer finger. Hold your yarn like this. You're going to take your knitting needle and reach down for the strands of yarn closer to me, closer to you, right here, and make a loop like that. And then reach and grab the other strands of yarn and pull it into that loop, such that that strand is the one that creates a loop and goes onto your needle, like so. And then the next important step is to take those strands of yarn closer to you, so in this case it's the shorter strands, and cross them over to the other side. That last step is essential to making the cast-on look braided. And that's literally it. You're just going to repeat that. So reach your needle down and grab that yarn closer to you. And then the other yarn, grab it and draw it into that loop and onto the needle. Then pull that taut. Take the yarn closer to you and cross it over to the other side. And then hold the yarn again in your hands like that. Grab the yarn closer to you and create that loop, and then draw the other strands of yarn into that loop and onto your needle. And then take the strands of yarn that are closer to you and cross them over the top and onto the other side. So again, reaching your needle down and making a loop with the yarn closer to you. And then draw the farther yarn into that loop and onto your needle. Pull it taut and cross the yarn that's closer to you over the top and onto the other side. Okay, like that. And then reach down, create a loop with the yarn closer to you, take the yarn further, draw it into the loop and onto the needle. When you have 13 cast-ons, you can move on to row 1. We are going to slip the first stitch purlwise, so basically pretend you're about to do a purl stitch. Your yarn should be in front, insert your needle from right to left and slip it off your needle. And that is a slipped stitch purlwise. And now you're going to have to move your yarn from front back to the back because we're going to work the rest of the row in knits. And so doing that is going to help create the braided edge. And from here, you're just going to knit across. So every stitch from here is just a knit. And the rest of the pattern is just repeating row 1. So you will just start the row with a slipped stitch purlwise, and then from there you're just knitting. I'm going to fast forward to the end of the row because I'm going to assume that you know how to work the knit stitch, and I want you to be able to get through this tutorial and on to making your project. So one thing I mentioned earlier is that your initial slip knot does not count as a cast on. So as we get to the end of this row, you will see that I am just going to undo that slip knot when I get to it. And so on to row 2. Just like row 1, we're going to slip the first stitch purlwise, and from there you're just going to knit across. So in this pattern, you're going to repeat row 1 19 times for a total of 20 rows. So I'm about 3/4 of the way finished here, and I'm just pausing to show you how the edges have that braided look, and that's from slipping our first stitch purlwise. So in case you want to see that one more time, pretend you're about to do a purl stitch, insert your needle from right to left, your yarn should be in front, and just slip that loop onto your right needle, move your yarn back to the back because we're about to work the rest of the row as knits. And that's all there is to this pattern. I'm going to speed up to the end of the pattern and show you the cast off. So casting off, binding off, that's how we get our project off of our needles, right? So we are just going to use a very simple bind off technique. So you're just going to knit the first 2 stitches. And then using your left needle, grab that first loop on your right needle and pull it over the other loop, like so. And now you're going to work another knit. And do what you just did. Grab that first loop on your right needle and pull it up and over that other loop on your right needle. Sometimes this can be tight and kind of tricky. So you're just going to work another knit. We're just repeating this all the way across. And then reach down with your left needle and grab the first loop on your right needle and pull it up and over the top loop. So now we're going to work another knit. And with your left needle, grab the bottom loop on your right needle and pull it up and over the top loop on your right needle. Just repeat that all the way across and I'll show you what we do at the end. So I've got a couple stitches here left to bind off. And when you have just one bind off remaining, we're not going to completely finish out that stitch. I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to make it into a hanging loop. So, we're reaching down and pulling this bottom loop up and over the top loop. And normally to finish off the project, I would cut the yarn to make a loose end, pull that yarn through this loop, and that would finish it off. But instead, we're going to leave this loop here and use our yarn and tie it in a certain way so that we can leave that hanging loop remaining and secure. So I'm going to insert my loose end through the loop, and then you are going to take that loose end again and pull it through that loop that you just made in there. So just showing you how to make a knot, really. And that will finish it off. The last step remaining is weaving in your ends. So I didn't have a needle with a large enough eye to fit this thick of yarn through. Maybe you do, but I found using my fingers worked perfectly well. So just like weaving in ends on any other project, I am going to weave the loose end through a few stitches, and then I'm going to weave it back again and maybe do that a few times so that I really feel like that loose end is secure. And when you feel like it's really secure, you can trim it off with your scissors. And I just do that for each and every loose end on the project. And there you have it, the Candor Potholder. I really hope you enjoy this knitting project. I know that I did. And if you want a printable PDF version of this pattern to accompany this video, you can pick it up in my shop, Modern Made Shop on Etsy. You can also find me on TikTok at modern_made_. Thank you so much for knitting along with me.